Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's again Wendy, Bowen from Start Line Physiotherapy. So the title of today's presentation is Anything is Possible from Here. And the idea for this talk came to me through listening to Wayne Dyer's Excuses Be Gone CD. And Wayne is really a big mentor for me. And in that, I was also introduced to a gentleman called Bruce Lipton. And he wrote the book Biology of Belief. And Bruce is a cell biologist. And he has a whole different take on life now in terms of the body-mind connection. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And the reason I chose to talk about the body-mind connection is because every day, day-to-day practice, I actually talk about this with my clients. And as physical therapists, we actually learn in school to take range of motion measurements. We learn to test the body's strength. We learn how the nervous system works. You come into my office and I'm going to ask you what kind of physical traumas or injuries you have had that are supposed to explain this pain that you're having. And I'll maybe look at your x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans, and which may add to the clinical picture, but they may not add to the clinical picture. And so that's all the physical stuff. And then I'm supposed to take the best research evidence that's out there, and I hate to tell you, but it's not really all that great sometimes, and say, okay, now how am I going to treat this person's physical problem? And the difficulty or the challenge is that you can have two people with the same injury and one gets better and one does not. So why is that? Is it because of me or is it because of the mind? And I don't want to stand up here and pretend to be, taking the place of a psychiatrist or a mental health professional when it comes to the mind. But the mind is, and we're learning from a lot of these other people, the mind is such a powerful thing that you can't neglect it as a therapist anymore. And so I do believe, and I don't know about all the other practitioners, but it is one of the things that makes me unique in my clinical practice is that I'm not afraid to talk about the body-mind connection. I'm not afraid to talk about the chakra systems. I'm not afraid to talk about meditation in your practice and how it is going to help with your healing. Because sometimes the block is not physical, it is actually mental. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about how the body influences, or how the mind influences our body. And there's three different areas here. One is our brain chemistry, or our neuropeptides, and that comes from Candace Pert in The Molecules of Emotion. And again, Candace is a scientist, so if people get skeptical here and start thinking, well, where's the scientific evidence here? She's a scientist, and they discovered neuropeptides and how they influence the body. The other is our genetics, and this goes into Bruce Lipton and the beliefs, the subconscious beliefs. So did you know that your body doesn't know whether you're actually physically experiencing what's going on or the injury, or whether you're just thinking about it? And the best example of this is just think about something really sad in your life and feel what's happening in your body. You can actually make yourself cry, but it hasn't happened, right? It's in the past. Or think about something really happy, because that's much more fun, and think about, just feel what your body's doing. And where this fits in with our pain, because those neuropeptides, that's what's happening. When you think of something happening, you get this surge and neuropeptides get released, and they're dopamine, serotonins, there are norepinephrines. They create the stress response in our body. And what happens with that is it's not just in your brain, it goes to every part of your body. We have little receptors on our cells, and that dopamine goes to the gut cell, and it makes you feel that, maybe that knot in your stomach. So that's the role of the neuropeptides in our body. And where does this fit in with pain? Well, if you have, let's say I have an injury or I step on something and it's sharp, and in my mind I think, oh, that's just a rock. So there's no emotional response to that. The sensory system, I get this pain that's coming up, it travels through my nervous system, goes up into the thalamus part of my brain, which is the sensory relay station where everything comes in. Right beside that is our limbic system, and that's our emotional response, and I don't have any emotional attachment to that rock in my shoe. But if I step on something sharp and I don't know what is it, maybe it's below the ocean surface, and I step on it, I don't know what it is, and I panic. I go, oh my God, I just cut my foot off, they're going to have to take it off, and I've got this big, huge reaction and emotional response to it. Then that's what gets ingrained into your nervous system, and you release those neurochemicals, and we get this fight or flight response, this stress response in our body. And that stress response is quite huge, and what you do is every time, then you go tell your story to somebody. You say, oh my God, I stepped on this thing and it's really, really big, and oh, it's huge, and I thought I was going to have to lose my leg, and so you get this and you tell your story, and I tell you my story, and I tell you, and I just tell everybody, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just like tracing your finger in the sand, right? And the grooves get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and then your body has that same response every time you tell that story again. So that's one of the things to keep in mind when we're looking at pain and the emotional attachment to our pain. And when you look at, so this is from Carolyn Miss, and she's a medical intuitive, and she says, only tell your story 3 times. You know, don't keep telling your story because you keep ingraining it into your system. It's really hard to do sometimes because you got to go to, you know, you have a car accident, you have to tell your story to the ICBC, you have to tell your story to the policeman, you got to tell your story to your spouse, to your friends. Then you go to the doctor, you have to tell your story. Then you come to me and have to tell your story. Then you go to the massage therapist and have to tell your story. 2 years later, you might come to me and you're still telling your story. So when it comes to genetics, and if we're looking at a cell, you have to remember that every cell in our body is its own system. It has a digestive system. It has a way to excrete waste. It has a way to take in nutrition. It has a respiratory system. It has a nervous system, and it has a brain. And that's the membrane covering around the cell. That's the brain of the cell. And you also look at cells, and they're made up of sugars, or carbohydrates. They're made up of fats. They're made up of DNA. And DNA, that's that double helix band. It's like crossing my fingers. And then you have proteins, and the proteins actually cover that DNA. And a protein, if you think about one of those nice little beaded necklaces, they're made up of amino acids. There's 20 that make up that chain, and they're also electrically charged. So depending on the sequence of those amino acids in that chain, and depending on the electrical charges, and that protein changes. And so we've got this DNA, this is our genetic makeup, we've got that protein. Well, what happens if I change the structure of this protein covering this? It exposes that gene. Now you've got this genetic thing happening, and maybe what takes that off there? What changes the shape of the proteins? And we'll get to that. But then when that cell divides, so now this maybe is my anxiety gene, maybe this is my fat gene that I've just uncovered. You know, maybe this is my gene for arthritis, depending on what's going on. That cell divides, and now that gene is in the daughter cells. And then this gene, they keep going, and so on, and so on, and so on, right? And so that's how our cells adapt. That's how we adapt to the changing environment. That's how our cells survive. So what changes? Hormones. You know, again, that stress response, that chemical response can change the shape of those proteins. Enzymes can change it, and I look at that as your diet. You know, what you're putting in can change the shapes. And our electromagnetic fields. We are electrical people. Just, if you don't believe me, just rub your foot on the carpet and go touch somebody and see what happens. So I always think, if you can change, and this is again from the biology belief, if you can change and remove that and create that genetic, why can't you cover it back up again? So that's something to think about. So the environment is actually going to affect what genes are exposed and what are not. And Bruce will even go so far as to go back and say that's happening at the time of conception and while the baby's in the womb. So whatever the mother is being exposed to, even in a negative environment, they're talking about can affect that. And for people who maybe sitting there with some skepticism, they can take a cell out of your body, put it in a petri dish in another room, put you in a room and expose you to either watch a movie on love or watch a movie on violence, and that changes the shape of the cell. And there's also an interesting study done by, I think his name was Hoshimoto in Japan anyway, but he took water cells and he labeled the water, love, hate, whatever, and the cell that was labeled water was a beautiful crystal, and the one that was hate was just all mangled. It was dirty and gross. So it's really quite interesting what happens. So think about your genes as just the memory of what we're learning, our learning experiences. So you think you can't change your DNA. If in your mind you're thinking, well, I was just born this way. I'm going to be fat. My parents had arthritis. I'm going to have arthritis. Think about this study. If you think you can't change things, Dr. Mosley is an orthopedic surgeon. In 2002, there was a report in the New England Journal of Medicine, and he did a surgery on arthritic knees, and where you go in and you just flush it out. He did a surgery on another group where you actually go in and scrape it out. And the third group, all he did was put them under, made the incisions, stood there and talked as if he was actually doing the surgery for the same length of time, sewed them back up and sent them all on their way. They all improved. All groups improved. And all groups improved the same. There was no significant difference. One guy who had arthritis in his knees and he couldn't play basketball, couldn't do anything beforehand without playing basketball. He had the mock surgery. So it's what you believe about the arthritis and the condition. So be aware of that diagnosis. We all go to healthcare professionals looking for the answers to our physical problems. but sometimes you have to remember what you believe. Everybody wants to know what is wrong with me. They look for CAT scans and MRIs, and one thing to remember about the CAT scans and MRIs is that 95% of the population with back pain have positive findings on their CAT scans or MRIs, but they don't have back pain. So it doesn't always explain the symptoms behind that. So now we're getting into the subconscious mind, and I like this. Habits rule the unsuspecting herd. So when you're thinking about our subconscious mind, that is where we do things automatically. When you are learning to walk or first learning a skill, you have to think about it. You have to concentrate on it. But now think about how everybody drives. Do we think about it? Sometimes we should. But we just drive automatically. We just get in the car. But when you were 16 and learning, you really had to concentrate. And then, so and we just create programs and we run them automatically. And now you think about these little kids and the belief systems that we expose our young kids to. They may come through their parents. They may come through through media. They may come through our teachers. And what are your beliefs about growing old? And everybody think about, what are your beliefs about growing old? Where did you learn those? Are they true? You know, what are your beliefs about arthritis? Do you think that if you get arthritis that you're going to be decrepit and crippled and aren't be able to function? Do you believe that when you get old, you can't be active, that you're just going to end up, in one of Dan's modified homes? And so your thinking about this is really important. Your subconscious mind is so much more powerful than your conscious mind. And where this comes into play, if people think about the power of positive thinking, it's not just about positive thinking, because I can be thinking, okay, I've got this diagnosis, let's say, of a cancer. And I'm going to beat this thing. That's the power of my positive mind. I'm thinking, I'm going to beat it, I'm going to beat it, and beat it. But what I have been programmed to believe in my subconscious mind is, you get cancer, you die. And this thing back here is saying, you idiot, you can't beat this, but your subconscious, so you get this power struggle. So you can change your subconscious beliefs. You just have to know what they are. And that takes an awareness. And I like this. I have the ability to change the way I perceive this. And as I change that around, I can shift the DNA in my body. And so that's a belief system as well. And this last one, incurable. This comes from The Secret. Incurable means to cure from within. And the best example of this is Lance Armstrong. And everybody not know Lance Armstrong's story? Stage 4 testicular cancer metastasized to his lungs and his brains. The doctors told him he had a 50-50 chance. Well, that's, for someone who's an optimist, 50-50, I'm going to do it. They went back later and said, really, his chances were 1%. But he did the work. He changed his environment. He changed his nutrition. He just changed how he thought about it, and he survived. So the power of the mind, I want you to believe, is really important in this. So go away and think about what you believe.
All right, great. Thank you very much.